Welcome everybody. Thank you, Eliana. Kelechi, I'm looking forward to talking with you again today. We've shared space before in another setting around the S word. What we didn't do that time was cover a lot of cultural issues that I thought were important. So we're going to do that today. I'm looking forward to that today. But let me briefly say something about Mecca, and I know also this is going to go up on my podcast, the Cultural Humility podcast. But Mecca is we're a collaborative of community agencies that formed over a decade ago, and why we came together was to make sure that when we whatever work we did, that cultural voices and community voices that were oftentimes left out of conversations, left out of funding resources, etc., were represented in those conversations. And so I kind of think of Mecca as the voice of making sure culture is present in our conversations, in our work that we do. And of course, Ileana is our executive director, and we have several different agencies who are part of Mecca. I won't go over all those agencies today, but we have a great website. We would encourage you to go visit the website and learn more about us and what we're doing and the work that we're doing. Leanna, you might want to say more about that as well. I know you're going to say a little bit about the Drawing Out Stigma program that we do. And then I have a podcast that, we talk about cultural issues, that, some of the things we're going to talk about today as well. And so this is going to be a great conversation. Thank you.
Mecca is a collective impact organization that works to eliminate disparities in our communities and works to increase the quality of life for multi-ethnic communities. And one of the programs that we've been doing for over 10 years now is the Drawing Out Stigma program, which is dedicated to reducing stigma and increasing mental health awareness through the arts. And this year we decided to do writing. And so over 350 community members, adults and youth, participated in a program right before the pandemic, sharing their stories. And Kelechi worked with our staff during that time to help our staff bring out these stories. And we decided that we wanted to highlight people's stories and do sort of a writer's workshop series. And we had worked with Kelechi in the past through the S word back in January. And so this is sort of a great reconnection. This program is also in partnership with Be Well OC. And they hosted the showing of the S word virtually this time around through Vimeo. And the link to see the film is in the chat. You can still see the film through the end of the week because it's Suicide Prevention Week. And our special speaker today, Kelechi Ubozoh, is featured in the film. And so I have the pleasure of introducing you, Kelechi, formally now. So welcome, Kelechi. Thank you for being part of Mecca's programming again. Kelechi Ubozoh is a Nigerian-American writer, mental health advocate, and public speaker. For nearly a decade, Ms. Ubozoh has worked in the California mental health system in the areas of research and advocacy, community engagement, stigma reduction, and peer support. Her personal story has been featured in O Magazine, CBS This Morning with Gayle King, and in the S Word, a documentary following the lives of suicide attempt survivors in an effort to end the stigma and silence around suicide. Last year, Ms. Ubozoh and LD Green published the book, We've Been Too Patient, Voices from Radical Mental Health. The anthology takes a firsthand look at over-medication, involuntary treatment, police brutality, stigma, and isolation, and features voices from the front lines of radical mental health. Through stories and research, contributors explore and challenge the biomedical model to bring the focus back to honoring and amplifying the voices of the survivors. We've Been Too Patient is featured in curriculum at NYU and Boston University. Currently, Ms. Ubozoh is a consultant supporting agencies through facilitation, training, coaching, and planning, research, and community engagement. And it's such an honor to have you have this conversation with us and to share your story and your experiences. It's been there's a lot that has happened since January, since we last reconnected. And so, we'll kick it off with Miguel. Let's talk about first the S word.
Kelechi, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate you being here and looking forward to the conversation again. Yeah, I mean, so there's so much we could talk about today in this very brief amount of time that we have together. But I guess in thinking about everything that's happening in the world right now, current events, and we're in the middle of what some people have called two pandemics. We've got obviously COVID-19. Others have called the other pandemic a racism pandemic. And I'm wondering, how those factors are impacting people's mental health. Particularly Black, Indigenous people of color, and what's happening, and just sort of how you're doing, how you've been responding to all this, where you're at, and just any thoughts you might have about that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And thank you both for having me in this space to talk about a really important conversation. I think the impact on our mental health collectively, whether you are a person of color or not, is tremendous. The pandemic has, people are calling this collective trauma. And then you couple that with generational trauma that communities of color have faced for years. And this very interesting ongoing, I don't even know if interesting is the right word, but the ongoing violence towards the Black and brown community. And then to try to, go to work and take care of your loved ones, or, do social distance learning with someone while seeing the news and trying to get through the day. I mean, I think mental health is more important now than ever. And I think as communities of color, I'm honestly really inspired and proud that people are finally people are really open up to having the conversations that I've wanted to have for years, because of the stigma, because of the belief systems, because of what we were taught, our own coping strategies to get us through the day. I think mental health has been left out or kind of in the dark somewhere. And this has been an opportunity in some of the darkest places to shine light on our emotional well-being and the importance of our mental health. So I think that's one of the first things. You asked how I'm doing, and I think I'm managing. People ask that question. Sometimes it's like, ooh, okay, what time of day are you talking? What happened right before? But I have this beautiful opportunity where I'm working with Black employees specifically to hold healing spaces so that they can have the conversations that I always wish I could have had when I experienced microaggressions in an agency, and also the ongoing violence towards communities of color, specifically Black folks. So I've been honored to be able to hold space for different community members to have these conversations and to just really release a lot of that pain, but also to move beyond our pain so we don't really wallow in it. And there's no judgment on where people are at with their pain, because this has been, I don't even have words for it some of the time, but the fact that people are open to talking about their true experience has been new.
Yeah, no, and it's been, I think that's been one of the positive outcomes, if we could call it that, of sort of these moments in time that we're experiencing. When you talk about trauma, I just want to quickly mention something that just happened recently. I think it even this can be somewhat traumatizing, but the administration, our Trump administration, ordered all federal agencies to end racial sensitivity trainings for staff. And I'm thinking about the healing circles that you're running now, for Black employees. And I'm wondering, how's that going to affect the potential ability for folks who need that support to get it in some ways. And, even the language, ending programs that frame the United States as historically racist and white people as beneficiaries of racism, calling it propaganda and a sickness that cannot be allowed to be continued. I mean, when I read that, I get I have this emotional, physical reaction, and so I'm wondering, what do we need to do to continue to have these conversations, do the work that you're doing when we have situations like that are just simultaneously happening, do you think?
Yeah, it's so funny. I brought this up today. This came up because I'm doing some work around holding spaces and talking about anti-racism and talking about healing, and the whole, now we're not allowed to talk about it. And I think the conversation that came up about that is like, we do what we always do. We code switch. We still do it anyways. We change all the language and remove all the words that say race and still have the conversation, right? We're not going backwards. And the more someone tries to shut us down, the louder we get. It doesn't really work. So I know folks are federally funded and there's a lot of fear about what you can and can't do or say, but it's open. The door has been open. We've seen what we've seen. It's been louder and a lot of people are awakening to things. We're not going to go backwards. So I think it's really like, how do you have that conversation? How do we frame things? And how do you say, you know what, maybe we have to lose some funding and we'll get other funding so we can have this conversation. Or sure, we'll technically do everything you said and have a conversation. We won't call it a training, right? I think we're very creative as people who have been oppressed in how we move forward.
Yeah.
It's not the first time, it won't be the last time.
Right. That's right. Yeah. I appreciate that. I just wanted to bring that up. I think that's right before us at this moment in time. So I appreciate you sharing some of that. Let's talk a little bit about the S word. You know, a lot of folks have seen it already who are here today. There's a few who are yet to see it, but maybe talk about just, you know, your experiences in being involved with the S word, experiences that you've had with regard to around suicide and stigma and the you know, all the what we're not talking about with regard to that. I think that would, you know, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so for those of you who haven't gotten a chance to see the film yet, the S word follows 4 attempt survivors, so 4 people who have survived a suicide attempt and 1 lost survivor, so someone who lost a loved one to suicide. And each of us talk about our own stories and what our experiences have been like, what was it like at some of the lowest points of our lives, and how we've moved forward or how we still struggle. It's definitely not like, and then everything was fine. Like, it's not that kind of story because it's a documentary and it's a real documentary. Mm-hmm. So I think what most people don't know is that when I was filming the S word, I actually ended my engagement that same year. So it was probably one of the worst times of my life. And I felt like, should I still film this? Because I feel so bad. And the amazing director, Lisa Klein, who is the director of the S word, who was filming me, was like, you tell the truth. You share what's happening. And I didn't want to talk about the relationship at that point. I wasn't ready. But I did talk about that, you know, I was still going to do the things that made me feel better, but I also was still struggling with, you know, thoughts of suicide while actively filming. And that, you know, before there was a lot of judgment. And I think when I've come out with my story, when I've shared my story, what I've been surprised about is how many people, does not matter their race, ethnicity, anything, will pull me aside. This is when we used to be in person and could screen the film and then talk afterwards. They'd pull me aside and say, that happened to me, or I'm a survivor, or it didn't even matter. I was like, oh my gosh, I really thought there was only like, I don't know, 10 of us. And then the more that I learned, I was like, oh my gosh, there's so many of us. I had no idea. And it's because people aren't talking about it. And there's a lot of reasons why people aren't talking about it. I, for one, had people say, like, pray it away. There's something wrong with your soul. And growing up in the Black community, spirituality in church is so crucial and really important. And, how does that feed into shutting someone down? And so what do we need to do? And I brought this up when I went to Atlanta, and I actually had a pastor, after seeing the S word, say, like, yeah, let's talk about how we can support mental health. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Instead of someone literally at one of the screenings chasing me around with a Bible, like telling me what I needed to get right with my life. And that's why people don't share. So it's almost like, how do we interrupt the shame and stigma around sharing that, because someone's in deep pain and feeling isolated? Isolation is what keeps a lot of this going, and connectivity. It's scientific, it's truth, but connectivity is what brings us out of these things. So if you're isolated, or your community is like, we can't talk about this, then, that can grow and grow. And I mean, I think from my experience, I don't have any more shame and stigma around my experience. I'm not afraid to talk about it. And I also know other people are in different spaces. And I feel like I'm still alive because I'm supposed to talk about it, because we're supposed to be having these conversations. So more people can talk about it and get help so that they don't have to go through what I went through. I don't want anyone to go through what I went through. It wasn't pretty.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And, you mentioned, obviously being a Black woman, and I was struck by, there was a report that came out from a task force not long ago. Actually, it's called "Ring the Alarm: The Crisis of Black Youth Suicide in America." It just came out earlier this year, actually, and it had something like, if I'm remembering, like, I think like between the early 90s and like 2017 or so, Black youth suicide attempts went up like 73% in the past couple of decades or so for both boys and girls, actually. And attempts rose like something like 100+ % with Black adolescent boys. And so what's happening, do you think? I mean, I'm asking the question because I know when you and I've connected about this before, you're like, it's happening in our communities. We're just not talking about it. And so clearly it's happening. And so what's happening and why aren't we talking about it, do you think?
Yeah. And take everything I say with this is coming from me. This is my experience, right? I didn't go out and research everybody. But one of the things that I'm seeing or experiencing is, like, as a Black woman, we are taught to you just uplift our entire community. If you even think about the Black Lives Matter movement, what is the first thing that comes to mind? George Floyd is usually the first thing that comes to mind recently. The way in which we don't talk about Breonna Taylor, the way in which she gets erased, the way that Black women get erased from our own movements. And it's not to say anyone's life is more important. It's just to say that it's something that happens in our community. Even as Black women, we uphold Black men, and we're taking care of so many other people. And we've been taught that, like, asking for help is a sign of weakness, not a sign of strength. So imagine all of that. I can't ask for help because I have to take care of everyone. Well, then where do I go? And I do want to say, and I said this in the film, like, the way that a Black woman breaks down may not be the way that other people break down. So when I was in a crisis, I was able to clearly articulate that I was having a really hard time. I was thinking about harming myself. And people just were like, oh, she's totally fine because she can articulate the way that she's feeling. And it's either I'm coming off as angry, so no one wants to help me when I get, like, because no one listened the first 8 times, or I well presented so well that I must not need anything. And I think we don't always check on each other, the people who are holding everyone or everything together. We have to check on each other. Like, we're a community collectively, and like Black men are holding it down for us too. And I don't want to, like, call anyone out. I think it's more of like, how do we call people in that everyone needs support, not the person you're always talking to and crying to, who is supporting that person, right? This is supposed to be mutuality. Yeah. So that's one thing. And the other thing is years of ongoing trauma over and over again. I mean, even just the Black employees I've been working with in different companies over the last several months, the level of just exhaustion, I'm so tired of seeing the same thing over and not feeling like anything's changing or anything is going on, that just hopeless feeling. And then add in the layers of, I'm in my home with all my friends or my family, or I'm having different dynamics with people because, COVID is here, right? And then I'm also losing family members to that as well. There's just a lot of complexity and a lot of reasons, but I think one of the things is where we don't always ask for help, and then when help is offered, it's not always the help that's actually helpful, right? So is it culturally responsive? Does anyone else look like me? Do they even know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about racism? Is someone going to brush me off because they don't understand it? Like, am I getting what I need when I ask for help? Yeah. And a lot of times that might not be yes. So I don't want to say it's, there's definitely hope and there's power in our collectivity and how we can grow and breathe with each other. And I think the mental health system hasn't done what it needs to do by Black folks. And we've had a lot of trauma with the system. If the way you entered the system was by being arrested, that is your relationship to the mental health system, right? that really impacts how you ask for help again, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate your example of when I asked for help, it's like I was so composed, or so put together, if you will, that people didn't really take it in the way that needed to be received in some ways. And it's interesting because that even with they've had talking about research, and there's been research with other women of color who it's impacted birth processes with other women of color because they're not expressing and manifesting the pain they're in the same way, and medical professionals not responding in efficient ways and times, and and I mean it just, I mean the how woven it is into our process, and then how that manifests within the systems is just, it runs deep. And I think that certainly has an effect on what happens, how we respond to things, how people respond to us, etc. What do we need to do? I mean, what do you think we should be addressing more around, just even trying to talk more about, mental health, suicide? How can we make this more prevalent in our communities to maybe prevent, suicide attempts, to help people address their mental health issues, etc. What do you think we should be doing a little bit more with regard to that?
That's a whole hour of Kelechi's thoughts. But what I'll say is there's amazing organizations already doing a lot of work. Like, I mean, I know Mecca's has some upcoming exciting work around this topic. There's also the California Black Women's Health Project. So I don't know if you've heard of them, but they have this thing called sister circles where they train up a whole bunch of like Black women and to hold other circles. So they train all these women and they're in a circle, so they experience it, they get education about health, mental health, well-being, and then they go out and hold other circles. So how can the community help build, and how can we help pay for this, right? That's one thing, is that if we were to look at our cultural practices and paying for what we're already doing that's working is one way to uplift this. I think the other thing is, and it's not easy, but I think if we try to normalize the conversation, that sometimes when someone's going through a lot of pain, they may have lost their job, they may have expressed a lot of they might look happy, right? Like when I was really at my worst, I looked great. No one knew anything was wrong, right? So it doesn't always look the way we think it's going to look. But if you build that platform of like, hey, if anything's ever wrong, I hope you can talk to me. Like if you ever thought about harming yourself, I hope I'm a safe person to talk to. If we were to normalize the conversation, and that if you come to me to talk about this, we're not immediately shipping you off somewhere. We can sit and have that conversation and talk about needs. Another thing is crisis planning. So that's one thing that I've done with my community, with my family, is I'm someone who's attempted. I know that I'm more at risk to die by suicide. So I don't play around with that. I'm like, okay, what's my crisis plan? If something goes wrong, who do I need to call? Do they all know each other? My mom has access to my partner. He knows what I need and what I want. And these are conversations that I wish we would normalize. And each culture is different, right? If I'm in a different culture, right? I know I've done some work with Larry Yang from Columbia University, and he did a lot of work with the Chinese community. And he's like, hey, in our community, it's not really about disclosing, because if you disclose, that you have a mental health issue, your brother might not be able to get married. The stigma is so deep. So what might work in one community might not work in the other. So I think it's almost like, how do you actually spend the resources to do participatory action research in those communities to understand what would work for them? Instead of battling with the culture, how do you engage with the culture to understand what would be specific to them? Because right now, most of the interventions are made not for communities of color. So, that's something to think about. And if we don't blame or judge people or tell them there's something wrong with them or they're broken, if we just were to listen to them and not judge them, it really goes a lot farther than you think. Because when you shut down a conversation, you might shut it down forever. So how do we not do that for folks?
Yeah, well, certainly your voice and you talking about it makes a difference, because you're talking about it and we're talking about it, and I think that helps. I think we have to just have more conversations too, and have more opportunities to talk about it without it feeling so stigmatizing and silencing and in the corner over there, or behind closed doors. And I think we just have to make it more public in many ways. These are public health issues, that we're dealing with at this point. So is there anything that are there any other issues that we're not talking about that we need to be addressing or need to be highlighting a little bit more, that as we think about as it relates to the S word, mental health, et cetera? I mean, anything else that we need to, other issues that we're not talking about that you think are important?
Well, one thing which is it's a really tough topic, but I think when we think of who is the first responder in a crisis, it should not be police. And I think actually a lot of police that I worked with when we were doing crisis intervention, a lot of them said, actually, I would really love if I was not the first responder to a crisis, right? It wasn't like a judgment. It was like, maybe I'm not the right person to come in and help de-escalate someone, right? Because we know that Black and brown folks end up in the justice system when there's a lot of mental health issues, or end up having not even getting into the system because of altercations when it was a mental health issue. So who's serving us when we're in crisis? How do we prevent the crisis? How do we leverage our spiritual communities as resources to help us as well, right? It's not to say we turn our backs on them. It's like, how do we engage and train up folks so that they can go to those places as a resource? How do we have sister circles, or whatever community you are, whatever kind of circle it needs to be for you? But I think the big thing is connectivity is key. And as we're all physically isolated from each other right now, what are we doing to keep our connection? And what are our own coping skills? When I first attempted, which was a long time ago, when I was really, really young, I was about 14, I had no coping skills. I lost my grandmother. I didn't know what to do. There were a lot of other things going on at the same time. But instead of anyone reaching out and saying like, oh my gosh, losing your matriarch who is raising you is a big deal, I can understand why you don't want to be here. It was, you're broken, you're sick, you're never going to get better. And then, you know, essentially hospitalized. And I was terrified by that experience so much that I was like, oh shoot, well, I'll just pretend I'm okay. I'll never tell anyone anything's wrong again. And do you know how many of us put on smiles on our faces when we're really hurting, but we're like, because if the treatment is traumatic, why is anyone going to go get that treatment? So we have to remove the trauma from the treatment. Oh my gosh, you got me like trying to do a TED talk right now. I'm gonna pause and breathe.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because there's been they've done some qualitative research with Black women who were in intimate partner violent relationships. And when they did the interviews with them, they asked them, why didn't you call the police to come and support you and give you, and they're like, because that was going to be more traumatizing than being in the situation I was with the partner that I was in for some of these women. Actually, I think it was a surprise to some people to hear that sometimes the systems that we encounter are more traumatizing than sometimes the situations we may find ourselves in. And I think that's powerful when you really think about it. So I have one more question I'm going to turn over to Ileana, but what has helped you, Kelechi, what has helped you go from there to where you are now? I think it's good for people to hear that, you know, what has worked, what's been helpful for you, and then I'm gonna let Ileana turn it over and start asking about the book and some other things.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you asking that question, because I can get really riled up about all the things that aren't working. But I think what's helped me is, one, therapy was really helpful, but it wasn't just therapy. It was finding someone I connected with, right? And that I also was like, hey, I want to work on these things. I have these goals. How are you going to show up? Because at the end of the day, I'm paying you. So I have some expectations about my mental health and advocating for what I deserved and what I wanted. And for me, my personal, and I've had many different experiences, and I had to use different modalities, but for me, what was helpful was cognitive behavioral therapy, and EMDR, which is around trauma therapy. They're very different. But I was the kind of person who I'd have this negative thought, or something would happen, right? I'd get like a speeding ticket. And then the speeding ticket would be like, wow, you're a horrible driver. Wow, you should never be in a car again. And somehow I'd go from, I got a ticket, to you don't deserve to live. I'm not even kidding, it would flip. It would be almost any interaction I had that was negative would put me in this negative cycle, because my self-tape, I just didn't like myself. I didn't like myself. I thought I wasn't worth anything. And all of the love that I felt was from other people. So I basically would be like, oh, Ileana loves me, so I'm going to be around her, and I'm going to be joyous, and I'm going to just suck up all of this joy and light. And the minute she goes away, I still have to be with myself. So I think the first thing I had to understand was, what is my relationship to myself, and why why do I feel like I don't deserve to be here? And then once I learned and unpacked about the deservingness to be here, about the things that I was lied about even to myself by so many other things, I started working to rebuild who I am and what I deserve. And that was not a really quick journey, and it's an ongoing journey. But now I'm like, oh, I like this person. And I also caused a lot of trauma myself. I was the most dramatic person ever, right? I'd be like, why is everything so dramatic? But I would go into situations, stir it up, and then be like, how did this happen again? So I also had to take accountability about what I was engaging with, who I was engaging with, what kind of dynamics we were having, which was a humbling experience, let me tell you, because I did a lot of things that weren't really healthy for me, because I was looking for attention or I needed love in some different places, and I restored myself back. So that was one really important thing. And then peers. So I'm someone who has lived experience. There's a connection of peers. So those are workers who have lived experience of mental health issues, but also are trained in recovery. And talking to other people who have been there and have experienced recovery was tremendously supportive to my recovery process. I always thought I was alone, and I really thought I was just this awkward, weird person that had all these thoughts. And then when you meet other people, are like, oh yeah, I felt like that on Tuesday. I'm like, oh my gosh, it really makes you not feel alone. And again, that connectivity is really important. So, and I think lastly was like telling the truth. I lied a lot. I lied in therapy in the past, which I don't know why, because I spent a lot of money on therapy and then I'd lie to them. So that was really a good use of a good use of funds. But I started telling the truth when I didn't feel good. I stopped pretending that I was okay all the time, and I stopped trying to take care of everyone else and stop avoiding myself. And I really, when I said I put myself first, it was more of like, I'm putting the mask on myself first, right? When you're like on that airplane and you put it on yourself first before you put it on the baby. I started doing that. And those are just some small snippets of things that I did, but I got to tell you, they were really, really helpful. And building a community that's supportive and loving and is just there for you is really, really important, really important. And also removing a bunch of toxic people. And people removed me too, because for them, I was toxic too, right? I wasn't an angel. So I'll be clear about that. But having to go through that was really part of my recovery.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Ileana does love you, by the way. So
I was about to say that. Well, first of all, I do love Kelechi.
all right. Thank you, Kelechi. I'm going to turn over to Ileana to sort of follow up with some of the book questions. So
Thanks.
I always get so much inspiration and information from Kelechi. And actually, we're embarking on a community-based participatory research project around suicide prevention to create culturally responsive suicide prevention training, which Miguel is leading. And so I think, thank you for those ideas that I always get from you when I have conversations with you. I wanted to talk about how writing has been healing. Our Drawing Out Stigma program has really focused this year on people sharing their stories and how that's really a healing process. And I have your book here, so everybody can go out and check it out. It's really good reading. It's called We've Been Too Patient, Voices from Radical Mental Health. And I'll just share a little story of how I sort of came across this book. It came out about a year ago. And I've had been talking to Kelechi for a long time when you were at Cal Mesa. And you actually, before that, Stacy from Remco introduced me to you. She's like, you've got to meet Kelechi. And I was like, okay. So we just started having conversations. And then you came down to Orange County to do a session. And then, so I knew Kelechi as someone that worked for Cal Mesa. But one morning I got an email from Voices of Our Nation, which is a program that is for writers of color. And her book was featured in that email. And I was like, I know a Kelechi. There's not that many Kelechis around. So I looked her up and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the Kelechi from Cal Mesa. And I realized this was your book and that you were in the S Word. And I put the two together and I was like, I already know her. Let's do the S Word in Orange County. And so that was sort of the beginning of the love connection with Kelechi, Miguel. And well, it continued the relationship. And so I wanted to talk about your book, and I wanted to find out, what was the impetus for writing the book? the process that led to it, because it's a very important book. We need more stories like this to be shared.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. So the book, my co-editor and I, so LD Green was one of, really helped birth this book process. We met at a feminist, womanist event, and we started talking about mental health, and we both found out that we both had lived experience of mental health issues. And we had a conversation about like, wow, there's a whole bunch of stuff written about us, but there's not like a whole bunch of things that feature stories from people who have been there and who've had that experience. What would it be like to, put a book together and just do that? So we had the idea, we started working and doing a call for submissions, and we started working together, and this beautiful book came to life. And the idea behind We've Been Too Patient is really to focus on the patient voice. What do people experience? What is the narrative? We have a lot of diverse voices, folks from the queer community, Black and brown folks. Really wanting to get the insight of like what happens when people have had these experiences that aren't so great with the biomedical model. And we are challenging the biomedical model, which, some people have feelings about, and that's okay. But our experience is really collectively is that there was something lacking for us from the biomedical model. Either it was traumatizing, so hospitalizing or over medicating, or dealing with police brutality or some of the stories. And we talk about other ways to recover through art, through being wounded healers, through, we have an essay about someone who basically did this whole decroot method where they're using Shakespeare with veterans to process their grief and trauma, right? There's just all these different creative ways to heal. And we don't all agree. We're a collection of people who don't agree with each other. And I think that's really important, because we do agree that we should have choice and voice in what happens in our treatment, but we don't agree on what that should be. And I think the biggest takeaway is really like, we should be driving what happens to us, not someone else driving us, because, a lot of people have had, there's a person who had electronic shock therapy, has lost a lot of their memories. Like there's a lot of things that have happened to people under the guise of help or health. And so we're really interrupting that and saying what worked and didn't work. So that's a little bit of the snapshot of the book.
We can relate to that at Mecca, using the arts, especially for some cultures that don't usually talk openly about how they're feeling. Sometimes doing a piece of visual art is the gateway into opening them up and having a dialogue about how what their story is and how they're feeling. And so at first I was really surprised, because people were like, well, we don't write, we don't talk, we don't share. But sometimes when you share anonymously and you write it on a piece of paper, a lot comes out. And so I really believe in the power of having alternative ways of healing that we haven't even explored yet. There's so many areas. What are the key things that you would hope people, the mental health system leaders, take away from this book?
I think some of the key takeaways is that there is power in narrative. There is power in our stories. And there's a reason why there's so many stories that have a similar thread of we weren't listened to, or we were abused, or, we didn't get what we needed. And it's to say, like, we need you to listen. We need you to have us be part of our own solutions, right? And I really think if there's anything to take away is that the trauma people have experienced through the system is real, and you're still responsible. So really thinking about what did you learn in school that's really not serving the people that you're trying to help. Like if you look around and you're serving a specific group of people, a diverse group of people, and you're the only and no one looks like them, there's a problem. And why aren't we having those conversations? Why aren't we utilizing the peer workforce who's so diverse and can bring so many people into the conversation? Why aren't we bringing those folks here? Why aren't we having them support each other? Why aren't we doing more of mutuality instead of a hierarchical approach? So a lot of communities don't want an expert to tell them what's wrong with them. And that's not what therapy is. And that's not what all psychiatry is. But a lot of folks don't want to share unless you share too. And that is really frowned upon in the biomedical model. So what are the models that we need where it's more of a mutual approach? Like, I'm not going to give you all my heart and soul and then leave it on the table and say, like, I hope that you heard me, right? How do you show up in this work? There's so many lessons in here, so many things I've learned from people about what is radical mental health, what does it look like, what does it mean? And I'm still learning. I still learn from these essays, and these people are really brave. And some of them had to be anonymous because they work in clinical settings and they'd lose their job, you know? And I just want to say that that's brave for them to even put their work out there.
Yeah, I really appreciated the honesty of the stories, and I'm hoping that you can share a couple of pieces from the book.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, I will read some short pieces. The first one is called She Wasn't Crazy. She wasn't crazy, but the world had a way of making her feel so. You tried being a black goth girl in Stone Mountain, Georgia. She liked vampires and Morrissey and how the darkness wrapped around her like a warm, familiar blanket. She was always too sensitive, too reactive, felt every feeling in high voltage. She wasn't crazy, but she said whatever she wanted, spilled words from her lips like red wine on white carpets. She left many stains. They called her Crazy K and it stuck. She crawled up fire escapes to hang off the edge, longingly looking down. She flirted with death. She wanted to know if she let go, if she would be free. She imagined a place where all people loved her. She wasn't crazy, but when Grandma, the ultimate matriarch who kissed her thick eye-lined face and marveled at her choice of combat boots with fishnets, well, when Grandma died, the darkness welled up and started choking her. She wanted to stop the world and get off, because when your world ends and you're still alive, there's something crazy about that. She was 13 when she wrote the first suicide note. It was on a Post-it. She wasn't crazy, but succinct. She was just honest. She didn't want to live. She got messy, and a friend saw the note and called her mom, and all her mom could say was, why, baby? The words left her. Was she crazy? But she didn't feel crazy. They stripped her down like an animal, took her shoelaces, put her on suicide watch while she squirmed on an uncomfortable cot. She felt pretty crazy then. The psych ward for kids smelled like every hospital, bleach with a stench of death and disappointment. Even in this place, there was a psych ward hierarchy. They separated the kids with the eating disorders from the crazy kids. The frail-looking teens never made eye contacts, but the other kids got it. They all dreamed of McDonald's French fries and getting out of the sterile purgatory, this life-size pause button. One day, little Christine tried to open the locked door, but it wouldn't budge. The security guard said, "We lock it to keep the crazy people out." She laughed uncontrollably. In hindsight, she could see he was right, because when she left the psych ward, she created a papier-mâché mask of glitter and light. She smiled until her eyes bugged out, and she made everyone feel comfortable. She said all the right things, and she lied about the darkness. See, all better now. The moment she stopped telling the truth, that was the moment she was truly crazy. So that is actually in the film. I was writing it as the S word was going on, and Lisa Klein was like, "Hey, do you want to read the poem that you're writing?" And I was like, "Okay, I guess." But I try to use crazy because it's a stigmatizing word. I want to challenge what that means, and I don't love the word, but it's really to challenge what does that mean and how does that feel. I know that's a little dark, so I do want to leave you with a piece, because people say, how did people show up for you? What does that look like? And I want to share how my friends showed up. Lately, I've been reflecting on my recovery, and I think about difficult times like last year. Recently, I was harassed by someone who attacked me years ago. This triggered some shadowy thoughts, but this time I asked for help. When it was too scary to be alone in my head, I reached out. I'm lucky. I have a fantastic support system. I called my mom, my therapist, and my friends to let them know what was going on. My mom immediately booked a ticket to California. During filming of the S Word, I admitted to the director of the film, Lisa Klein, that I wasn't in a good place. We stayed up till 1 a.m. talking. She listened and held space for me as I cried. My friends and family offered love and support, and we worked on a plan of what was going to get me through this. This is how I showed up. I was honest and accountable. I told my loved ones what was going on and that I needed their help, time, and support. I didn't lie or pretend that everything was okay when it wasn't. I stopped trying to power through or be strong. I remembered that everything I put before my mental health, like relationships and jobs, I've lost. So this time I put my mental health first. I took time off of work and decided to focus an entire month on my mental health treatment. This is how my friends showed up. When someone is physically sick, people know exactly what to do. They bring casseroles, they send flowers and cards, they make phone calls, they think about what someone is in pain needs, and they do that. I want a casserole. I don't think it should be any different for folks who are feeling suicidal, but I get it, it's scary. What do you do? What do you say? How do you show up for someone who's going through darkness that you might not understand? I don't know the answer for everyone, but this is how my friends showed up. When I was so depressed I couldn't get out of bed, my friends brought me groceries. My friends took me to poetry readings and hiking in the redwoods. They brought me to dance classes and karaoke, invited me to dinner, sent me inspirational texts featuring unicorns and or vampires. We had weekly walking dates for physical activity. A friend in New York sent me an adult coloring book with crayons and curse words. I also got to see this beautiful exhibit called The Black Woman is God, where I saw creations from other Black women all over the world. Some friends called, some friends sent letters or emails. One of my closest and oldest friends did something pretty phenomenal. She wanted to make sure I didn't feel alone during my month of recovery. So she sent me a daily reminder that I'm loved. So each of the 30 days that I decided to take care of myself, she left me presents, all numbered to open. Every morning, I'd wake up and unwrap something lovely. She sent lavender, which is under my bed for sleeping, sage for cleansing, and chocolate, because, well, chocolate is amazing and healing. She also left in letters of our fondest memories and our inside jokes and reminders that I could get through this. None of this acts of kindness required a background in therapy, just plain old thoughtfulness, which any human is capable of doing. Nothing was too small to make a difference. What I needed was connection, an interruption to the isolation and negative thoughts in my head. In the past, I pretended everything was okay while I secretly broke down. But this time was different. If we can create a world where the stigma of suicide is decreased so people speak out when they're in pain, maybe we can prevent anyone else from dying. And fighting the stigma in silence is how we can all show up.
Thank you, Kelechi. That was so powerful. One of the key things that you mentioned is in order to get that kind of support, sometimes it takes a lot of courage to open up and say, I need help. So what would you say to folks who kind of hold it all in and put on this face that everything's okay, even though right now during this time, during the pandemic, many of us are isolated, many of us are struggling with trying to handle multiple tasks, maybe loss of a job. And so I think as human beings, we can be there for each other, but it's hard for each of us to open up and say, I need help right now. So I don't know, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's different for everyone. So when I asked for support, I've learned who to ask for. So not everyone is supportive. Let's be clear. Sometimes you ask someone and they're not ready or they're not open. So one of the things is like, who around you makes you feel energized when you're around them or when you talk to them? You get off the phone with them, you feel better. Who doesn't judge you, who loves you. And I have a lot of family members who are loving and some folks who are judging. And that's okay. But if I'm in a time where I need really serious support, I'm going to really focus on the people who just make it easy to be myself. And I might start off with something small, like, yeah, I had a really tough day today. And if they're able to hold that, we might get a little deeper, right? I almost do my own little, like, can you handle a little bit of this? And see if they can. And there's also, there are support groups where people actively are supporting each other, and that's what they're like learning to do in those spaces. There's therapy to ask for support too. And a lot of insurance providers are realizing the importance of having communities of color, clinicians of color. So they're actually actively seeking and hiring more of those folks so that there can be more support there. But I think the first step is knowing that you deserve to be held and you deserve to release something. You don't have to do it all by yourself. It doesn't have to just be you. And I think that's one of the first steps. And that's something that I had to learn too.
I think there's a lot of courage in being vulnerable and asking for help. Please share with us how writing has been healing for you, and how did you, come into writing?
Yeah, so writing, I always wanted to be a reporter. Since I was like 5 years old, I like to interview people. I loved their stories. I liked writing other people's stories, but writing more recently, or last several years, has been a really great way to get what I need down on the page. So if I'm not ready to talk to someone about something, or if it's like too early in my like healing process, sometimes I need to just kind of get it down on the page. And that's a place where no one's going to judge me. I don't get any feedback that I'm not ready for. And sometimes it just needs to get out of my body. So that first step was writing, but the second part was sharing. So when I can share or perform, there's something that releases from me. I don't have to carry that anymore. So that's been really, really important. And I think writing is something that is accessible to all of us. We don't have to be amazing writers to use journaling as a tool, right? You don't have to, sell any books. You could just like focus on what you need to do and what you need to release.
I think both of the pieces that you read are like pieces that we needed to hear. They're like examples of how we can support each other and what it feels like to go through the system. And, keeping that inside, if somebody else hears that, they don't feel so alone. Maybe they experienced it too. So sharing our stories and having you share that and be sort of a model and collecting these stories in this book is just really important. I can't emphasize that enough in case anybody wants to purchase this book, that, it's just a really important thing that all of us need to do. So thank you for that. I wanted to have you share with us maybe a prompt that could help all of us during this time to share our story.
Yeah. And then I want to hear from other people because I want to hear what their questions are.
We're going to start a Q&A.
Hey.
But if people want to write down this prompt, and we'll say it again at the end.
Okay. So let me think about a writing prompt. And again, if you're not a big writer, that's okay. I think it's just helpful. You could journal this. What reflections of strength have you seen in yourself in the last few months? What have you learned about yourself? I'm going to say that one more time. So what reflections of strength have you seen in yourself the last few months? What have you learned about yourself?
Okay. Great. And so we'll come back to that. But right now is a good time to start our conversation with Kelechi. We've learned so much about her and her story and her experience with the S word. So we have one question in the queue so far, but we're going to spend a few moments sort of doing a Q&A, Miguel, you and I, with Kelechi, and then those that are going to be asking questions. So the first question, Kelechi, is, do you think there is more toxic masculinity steeped in Black culture? If so, do you think that affects stigma for Black men, specifically around accepting, seeking help with mental health challenges?
Oh, that is a brilliant, very difficult question. I think yes, collectively, we're all impacted by toxic masculinity. And because of that, and, the men that I love, the men that my brothers, the people that I want to have conversations about mental health, I'm the only one they're talking to about mental health. I'm that mental health person. So I do think that the idea that you have to be strong, or I'll see little kids being taught don't cry, be a man, really immediately that you have to stuff down your feelings and not feel, really does affect all masculine energies, or our masculine folks. And so and as much as I'm a really, really big Star Wars fan. And then when I look back about he showed too much feelings, so that was the dark force. I was like, oh, is that what we're? I try to turn my brain off because I don't want to get too deep on that. But just the idea that showing or emoting is a problem that needs to be interrupted is really harmful. And also there's a reason why we've done that. It was a coping mechanism to protect ourselves. So it's not a judgment on our coping mechanisms that we use to survive so long. But the question is that serving us anymore? I don't think it is. So where did our Black men get support? Where can they have a place to heal and not be like made fun of? Where do they get to be vulnerable and not get judged? And that's for any person with that energy. So I think that's important. Thank you for the question. I don't think I answered it, but I'm like all about it.
Okay, we have another question. People who are employed spend so much of their time at work. What suggestions might you have for colleagues about how to be supportive of coworkers' mental health, especially during COVID and all the other challenges that we are all facing right now?
Yeah, I know that for a lot of us, we're spending more time at work than we already were, right? We were not like, we're double downing on work because now work is accessible. It's 24/7. So one thing is, where are you finding breaks? Are you in back-to-back meetings? Do you ever leave your seat or chair? Can you go outside? I mean, granted, in California, there's a lot happening with our air quality, but do you have a space to actually breathe and rest? And then how can you be supportive of coworkers' mental health? I mean, I think one thing that I've been thinking about is, what are things that I know other people appreciate, right? I actually just did this whole campaign where I was just like, I used to do acts of kindness for people in person when I saw them, but now I'm just sending them things. I'm really just randomly sending people like flowers. I'm not even telling them that's from me. I'm just sending them gift cards. I'm sending them things to make them smile, because that actually gives me energy. And maybe it's not financial, but do you have time to actually debrief after a really tough weekend of bad news over and over again? Or are you just rushing into like, let's go into our agenda? Do you have time to say like, man, how are you holding up after all of that stuff? Can we talk offline, right? Or maybe you have Zoom fatigue, but you want to still talk on a like phone call, old school, right? I do think making time for that, and then also knowing that work is always going to be there. Work is always going to be there, but your mental health is more important than your job. I know it's a scandal. I'm going to say it. People don't love it, but mental health is more important than your job. So if your mental health is in a bad place, or you're worried about someone else's mental health, how are we taking breaks? How are we uplifting that paper can be due later? You are a priority. And I hope that's helpful and makes sense.
Yeah. I know that some of us are busier than we've ever been before. And if you're working from home, it's like your job never ends. So it's definitely a difficult time. It's hard to walk away from work sometimes, or to find that connection with others over Zoom. You have to figure out alternative ways to connect with folks. We have a couple more questions, and if you have more questions, you please put them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll direct them to Kelechi. The question that we have is, what has been your greatest challenge with someone who has had a challenge with mental health?
Oh, that's a good question. I think my greatest challenge with someone who was having a mental health challenge was their capacity to understand or want to seek help or want to do anything different. So ironically, we both worked in mental health, so we knew mental health was real, but for them, they were not in a space where they wanted to take accountability for how their mental health was, or that self-care was important. So I think the biggest challenge for me was, I wanted to rush them to recovery. I was like, you got some stuff you need to work on. How are we going to do this? And what I ended up doing was taking on so much of that myself, and essentially not helping anyone, draining myself and enabling them to do exactly what they were doing. So I had to take some steps back about, well, mental health might be this word that's big. What can I say that's more specific? When you do X, this is how this impacts me. So I might not say like, your mental health is a challenge. It's like, hey, when you're not showing up, or when you're talking to me in this way, being really direct and specific about what's happening, as opposed to like, I don't want to talk about it, but I see that something's happening. That really helped make it not, so it helped demystify things. And just, Miguel is like a clinician and brilliant, and is also on this line. So he should also jump into mental health questions.
You want me to answer? You want me to go in?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Here.
In terms of what has been the greatest challenge with someone as a mental health challenge, that particular question in
Oh, I
general?
think there's a good one that says like, what advice would you give for talking to a partner, a family member about mental health struggles when they don't believe mental illness is real?
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I always like this idea of meeting people where they're at. I think that's really important. And so we can't force things onto people. We really just sort of try to plant seeds. I always tell people, let's plant seeds, and then hopefully people will water them, at some point in time when they're ready. And so I think we have to. It's kind of like what you were saying earlier, Kelechi, about our system is not. It's not universally applicable to everybody at this moment in time. In fact, it's part of why many of us do not get the treatment that we need, because there's incongruence and inconsistencies there. And so I think when we talk with our family members and our partners about, someone who may have a mental health struggle but don't believe it's real, it's like, how can we meet them where they're at? How can we sort of identify and create a conversation that's consistent with how they see the world or think about these issues in some ways? It's a little bit of work, because it really, it's I think the easiest thing to do is just to kind of go in there with a blanket statement or what everyone talks about, etc. And that can actually turn people off. So I think it's around planting seeds, meeting people where they're at, using language. I think language is so important. So important. I mean, even you talking about, this idea of crazy, and she wasn't crazy, and why you're using that to, I think all those things matter. So how we talk, the language that we use to talk about mental illness with other people who don't believe it exists, or believe that the origins are connected to something that may or may not be, consistent with the situation that people are in. I think all that really needs to be taken into consideration around, how to destigmatize it, how to invite people into the conversation in some ways. And so language, meeting them where they're at, cultivating a conversation, planting seeds, I think all those things are really important.
There's more questions that are coming in. For those that are very isolated, do you have any suggestions for mental health workers on how to assist folks in building the natural supports you referenced earlier?
I wish I could physically see that. Sorry, that helps me. Okay. Okay. Do you have suggestions for mental health workers on how to assist folks in building the natural supports you referenced earlier? So I know I have a couple of friends who are literally they're by themselves, and they're taking all this seriously. Everyone has different boundaries around seeing people. But one of the things that has been helpful for them is using technology in different ways. So either doing Marco Polo or leaving videos for people, or finding ways to connect. Like, I'm not even talking about games. So I know, like, one thing one of my groups of friends is doing is like having a Zoom game. So it's not like a Zoom meeting, but we're coming to meet and we're playing a game. And it sounds like it has nothing to do with mental health, but then you're having conversations. How was your day? What's going on? Oh, I'm really stressed. Like, is there an activity you can do that brings you together that is focused on connectivity? And then also, if folks who do not have those natural supports, so there are things like the California Peer Warm Line, there are also peer support groups. There's lots of support groups that are like popping up, connecting to like those support groups. And for folks who feel comfortable or doing social distance outings or doing things like hanging out in a parking lot, I got to tell you, when I finally saw someone, it really changed my mood and experience. I was like, oh my gosh, we're not hugging, but it's just good to sit outside with you, near you. So those are just some of the things that have been helpful for me and some of my community and my network. And I think that's something that's accessible too.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure how to pronounce, I don't want to mispronounce this name, but Lucia Lalonde had I think a really important response. Just want to bring to everyone's attention around being there for someone, maybe praying for someone, being there for her. Sometimes that's a lot. I mean, if you think about how much therapy is really unique in some ways, because it's like, how often do we really get someone's undivided attention for like the amount of time that you go and you talk to a therapist or whoever it may be? And I don't think we do that enough with each other. Actually, I think we're always distracted. We're thinking about I think sometimes just even being present and really truly listening and being there with someone is powerful, actually. And so I really appreciate, you know, this individual sharing that response, because I think there's a lot to be said with just really being truly present and hearing and listening to somebody.
Yeah, that's personally been really helpful for me. No one had to fix anything or come up with a solution, but they just listened. I had a really tough Friday, and I had a friend just really listen to the conversation, and I just felt just relieved. And she didn't have any answers. I just needed a space to just talk.
Yeah.
I see some other questions in the Q&A outside of the chat. One from Walter: what types of self-care rituals do you practice after you hold or share space for others who are going through some emotional or mental health issues? Really good question. Before and after. So I learned the other way. Before and after the healing sessions I'm facilitating, I actually do meditation. I do some prayer, and I start actually listening to some really calming music. I have aromatherapy happening over there. I'm like lighting some candles. I am preparing the space to hold space for other people. And that gets me kind of in the space to hold space for others. And then after, because before I was just doing it before, and now after, I have also a similar, like, let's close this loop out. I received a lot of things. Sometimes people get upset in the space and it's not directed at me, but I can feel it. So what do I need to like release that? And, you know, and I also set intentions. Like I want to support Black and brown people and having the conversation they need today. And I write down an intention and I put it out there and I have a candle and I'm like, that's my intention for the day. Right. And then I close that out and blow the candle out. So those are just some of my things before and after. It was a really good question, because when you hold space for other people, you do also have to make sure you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
There's another question. What advice do you have for sharing lived experience in your professional work life as it relates to self-care, grace, and an adult with high ACEs score, adverse childhood experience score? Yes,
and thanks for breaking down what ACEs meant. So disclosing is a personal choice. Not everyone is very excited when you disclose, and it can be life-changing and powerful when you disclose. So it is definitely a personal choice. And I think one of the things, so I've disclosed, and now if you Google me, I'm forever a suicide attempt survivor. That is what it is. So if someone doesn't want to hire me because of that, I will not get hired. Like, it is known, it is out there. But I felt like it was important for me to be that person or have that voice in the world. And I will also share that I have been fired for disclosing that I was having struggles, mental health struggles. So I don't want to, you know, make it all rosy and, you know, perfect, when the reality is disclosing is really, really important, and there can be some consequences. So the big thing, or really interesting thing about disclosing, is you can choose how you disclose, right? You could disclose to one person that you just feel them, you know them, you trust them, you get a good sense, you might kind of see like how they feel about other things, and then you're like, this is the person I want to disclose to. It can be really powerful to disclose in your work. I have felt that. I had a therapist disclose to me, and that really changed our relationship. And I really thought that, wow, I was like, wow, oh my gosh, like another person who's healing and working on this. Maybe I'm not broken. I have to remove this weird broken stuff that I used to believe. I no longer believe that. But I think disclosing, and there's really great work by Patrick Corrigan, Open, Honest, and Proud. He has this whole curriculum about how you can go through and almost try to negotiate, like, ooh, should I disclose to that cousin? Oh, maybe not. But, oh, I do want to disclose to that teacher, or maybe I want to do a whole campaign. Because when you do disclose, you can access so many different types of people. And I have some friends who are clinicians who are doing some really great work because they're in a space where they have more power and they can push different things because they haven't disclosed. So I think it really depends on the person. And I definitely would ask or say, like, definitely check out that curriculum. It's free $99, my favorite price for paying for things. Open, Honest, Proud, Patrick Corrigan. It really helped me decide how I disclosed or not disclosed, which I clearly have disclosed.
Miguel, do you want to add to that? I know that you're a fan of Patrick Corrigan too.
Yeah, no, you know, I mean, I think it's true. The thing that, you know, I'll just to follow up with what Kelechi said, I think the thing that always concerns me is when other mental health professionals and providers are the ones who make those, you know, when they're sort of like maybe, you know, Kelechi was released from a place where it's a mental health providing agency, or, you know, whatever. I don't know where it was, but I think that happens where even within our own communities of mental health professionals and providers, we don't always respond in the best ways to these situations and circumstances. And that concerns me in many ways. And so I think we just, you know, we don't want to take for granted that just because we're in this field that somehow or another we're free of bias or free of judgment, or, you know, we have to do our own work around these issues, or around our own limitations and blind spots and uncomfortableness, and how we try to make sense of these situations at times that are maybe unjust or unfair to other people. And so I think, you know, we just, I just want to at least mention that we you know, we have to work too. We come and we, like, I think when we think about our perceptions around mental illness, suicide, etc., we're all being influenced by the narratives around us, the perspectives around us in some way. So if we're not intentionally working against, you know, combating some of the things that perpetuate the stigmas and the judgments and the biases against people who may experience some of these circumstances or situations, whether it's our patients, clients, whether it's colleagues, whoever it may be, we're maybe unintentionally perpetuating the very things that we're trying to fight against at the end of the day. And I think, you know, we mustn't think that we are free and clear from some of these things simply because we're in the field, or simply because we do this work in some ways. I mean, we're all working, and we need to keep working and be intentional about it. So,
Absolutely.
We have another question. Do you internalize other people's feelings, or how do you cope or refrain from doing that? That's something I always struggle with.
Thanks for sharing that, Monica. I think one of the things that I had to work on, this might sound wild, I thought everyone was mad at me all of the time. Oh, like I always thought, you know, oh, she didn't say hi to me, maybe she's mad at me, or like she was abrupt, and I did have like one therapist was like, nobody's thinking about you, like, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're right, they're not. But I did internalize not only what people were actually feeling, what I thought people were feeling. So I was doing some future tripping. I was like, you know, palm reading without any palm reading. So one of the things I, you know, asked myself is like, is this mine? That is, and a lot of times it's mine. And so I'm like, okay, we're gonna leave that one alone. And when I'm holding space for other people, and recently someone got really upset, and, you know, they directed their anger at me, but it wasn't mine. Like, I was like, I haven't actually done anything to that person, and they're angry, and I'm just gonna witness and hold space for that. So it did take some time, and I had to debrief with my partner and say like, oh, that hurt my feelings, and just be human in that moment. But I think the big thing is like asking the questions of like, is this helpful for my mental health, or is it harmful? Is this mine to do? Is this my experience? And, you know, just a string of questions that I ask myself. But, you know, when you're an empathetic person, sometimes you can absorb a lot more than you really want to. So it's double downing on like building up your resiliency, building up that safety net, so you can still hold space for people, but it doesn't hurt you. Hopefully that makes sense. These are some really great questions. Mm-hmm. And yes, look at all of you putting resources in here. Y'all are amazing. You're like, here's how you can get trained. Here's the suicide prevention webinar. You all are so amazing for just even having this dialogue with each other and showing up. I think I told Ileana last time when the S word first came out, like there were a lot of people who didn't even want to host us because they were like, we can't actually talk about that. So the fact that you're here on like the day after Labor Day to have this conversation really says a lot about, you know, the folks that are still in this space. So just want to say thank you for staying in and talking about this.
It's like the other S word, you know, we shouldn't talk about sex with adolescents, because if we do, they're going to go out and do it. It's like, well, you know, newsflash, stuff's happening. So, so, you know, we got to talk about it. We got to talk about it for sure.
There's another S that I want us to talk about, and that's our story.
Mm-hmm.
Story. So we want people to share their story, and Mecca's actually creating a website page highlighting people's written stories. We'll include some highlights from the organizations that we work with, some of the writers from the different ethnic communities. And I have to tell you, I've read some of the stories and they have made me cry. It's a beautiful insight into people's lives and experiences. And just, I felt like I just had an insight to people's culture and the struggles that we're facing. And, you know, we invite people to share those stories because other people can connect to them and realize that they're not alone. And so there's a website for now, if people want to share their story, called ocmecca.org/submit / and we've created that, and we're in the process of uploading all of these stories. And we just felt that they were so powerful. So we'll be also creating our own little book, maybe not published yet, like yours, Kelechi, but our own community book of stories. So we invite people to be part of that process by sharing their stories. Again, the prompt was, what reflections of strength have you seen in yourself the last few months? What have you learned about yourself? You know, we've had a lot of time to spend with ourselves during the last few months. And I like that your question, your prompt focuses on, you know, what strengths have we developed? What resilience have we developed? And hopefully in sharing that, you know, other people will learn as well. I wanted to just kind of invite everyone to do the survey that is in the chat. We also want to encourage people to connect with different resources out in the community. First of all, want to thank the Orange County Healthcare Agency for funding this program, Drawing Out Stigma, and this webinar tonight. I feel like they, you know, not only for making this possible, but really believing in the power of this work and believing in alternative ways to healing and reducing stigma. And they've been doing this work for many years, using the arts to hold space for people and have people open up about their mental health. So big thank you to the healthcare agency for making this possible. Also, I wanted to mention that Be Well OC, which seeks to transform the mental health system, has been a wonderful collective impact organization, bringing us together to talk about these issues and to create changes that we had never really had the space to, you know, have conversations about what works, what doesn't, and how can we make things better. And they're doing that. So please make sure to go visit beweloc.org. They have a wonderful program called the Be Well Ambassadors of Hope program. And the mission of that program is to cultivate hope, create connections, promote mental wellness, and advance suicide prevention in Orange County community by leading various activities and serving as navigators for the Be Well system. So if you have, for more information for this volunteer program, please visit Be Well OC or email Brandon Soltis at mindoc.org. You can also join Be Well's Community Suicide Prevention Facebook page, and we'll post the link on the chat, but also you can just look for Be Well Community Suicide Prevention webpage, Facebook page. The next Be Well Quarterly Coalition meeting is Thursday, September 24th from 1 to 2:30. We'll put the registration link in the chat. And that's a wonderful space. They meet quarterly, and different providers and community members come together to talk about what's going on in the mental health system. There is so much help available. The California Peer Run Warm Line is available 24/7. It's 1-855-845-7415. And that just started this year, right, Kelechi?
It actually started last year, but they've been up to 24/7. So before it was different time limits, and now they actually have Spanish too for certain hours. So definitely recommend that resource.
The NAMI OC Warm Line is available as well 24/7, 714-991-6412. Of course, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. And there's a wonderful resource, eachmindmatters.org, and one of the segments of that is Know the Signs, which is focused on suicide prevention. So that is suicideispreventable.org. The Orange County Healthcare Agency has compiled a list of resources and events and trainings taking place throughout Orange County this month, and we'll put the link in the chat. But there's a long list of events taking place. Dee Hirsch is also a local organization, ddhirsch.org, that works on suicide prevention and training. And the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention as well has a chapter here in Orange County. We'll put some links about MECA's Drawing Out Stigma program last year, which we came together and we did a multicultural, multi-generational film to talk about stigma reduction. And it's about 20 minutes long. It's on YouTube. It's called My Story, My Journey. There's other stories there as well that we are collecting, 3-minute stories, people with who have recovered and from substance use disorder, and also are sharing their mental health stories. So we really believe in the power of sharing your story, and we want to thank you, Kelechi, for sharing your story today. It gives us all so much courage to continue sharing our story, because it's just so valuable. And Miguel, do you want to say anything?
You know, the thing that I would just emphasize, and just want to thank Kelechi again as well for the time and you know, sharing so transparently and I think openly with everybody, and continuing to do that in the past and going forward. But you know, you mentioned connection multiple times. We've mentioned connection multiple times today, and you know, I think that we can underestimate you know, being connected and being healing in community. And I think that's very powerful. We know that in isolation we get worse, and in connection we heal. And so I just would really encourage folks to get creative with your connectivity and what that looks like at this moment in time, given the circumstances. But it's more important now than it ever has been, I think. You know, we're talking about, you know, being in this pandemic and being self-reflective and thinking about sort of who we are, what we're doing. And the other thing I would say is, you know, think about what you want to leave behind. We don't have to go back to everything that was pre-COVID-19, and sort of, you know, kind of leave behind what you don't want to continue to carry with you, because some of it may not be so helpful. And it's an opportunity to think about what we do need to take care of ourselves and to take care of others. You know, if there was ever a time in the history of our country, at least in my lifetime, and many others who are older than me as well, who've talked about this, that it's manifesting the individualistic nature of our society here in the US. It's happening now in many ways, because we're not taking care of each other. And so I think we need to do that better. And there's much that we can learn from many of our cultural communities, our racial ethnic communities, who are about connection and healing and collectivistic. And so I think, you know, let's learn from each other. Let's take care of each other. Let's heal with each other. Let's love each other. And let's keep sharing our stories with each other as we move forward. I think it's going to be the best thing for us. So thank you, Kelechi. Appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Thank you for both having me on. We had one last question, which I think really wraps us up, which is, do you think art's experience and art making enhance healing and resilience? Absolutely. I don't know if you can see this painting behind me. It gets brought up in a lot of places, but the artist lost his sister to suicide, and she was the inspiration for this beautiful piece, and helped helped him heal in this way. And I really think telling your story, I know I was keeping it real about how sometimes that might not always work out well, but I really think we need more of your stories. We need to be a collective so we can build on each other. And connection does not care about your race or ethnicity. That is something you can do cross-culturally. So connecting to each other, connecting to your loved ones, connecting to your elders, and telling people, tell them how you feel about them. Tell them what they've meant to you. You don't need to wait. Like, it's time. It's time to tell people what they've done and what they've meant, and uplift them. You know, so I appreciate you all staying in this room for as long as you have, and for you both hosting me and bringing this conversation about from our communities of color and that aspect, because I really want us to normalize this conversation, to normalize what this means. And so we can access mental health, whatever that means for our community, because we all deserve it. We all have health. We all have mental health.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that this is on Facebook Live, and we'll be posting the resources as well there. And we'll be posting it on YouTube and on Miguel's Cultural Humility podcast to continue this conversation. So thank you both for being part of this, and thank you for the audience for asking questions.
And do the survey. Do the survey.
Survey.
Andrew put the survey in the chat. In the chat box. So please do the survey. Please do the survey. It's important. It allows us to continue to do this work, and it's important. So thank you for taking a few minutes to do the survey. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Miguel. Miguel is not only a psychologist, but also our evaluation director at Mecca. So definitely he wants the surveys turned in. Thank you all for being part of this. And thank you, Kelechi.